healthcare, HCPs, HCP marketing has sort of weathered the storm and been vital during this time period. What's sort of the basic state of the industry from the TrendMD perspective?
So it's a good question. So for just a little bit of background before I answer your question directly, so we are kind of a solution for HCP marketing. So TrendMD is essentially a network of sites. Scholarly publishers, medical publishers use a recommendations widget on their site. And it's there where we show sponsored links. It's really similar to what people have seen probably on like New York Times or CNN. It's sponsored content at the bottom of the page. The only difference is we do it for medical and academic audiences particularly. So, for us, which is really interesting, I think the overall trend, I would say over the last 10 or 15 years, has been less on spending on reps in person and more on digital spend when it comes to reaching doctors. And I have a kind of dual perspectives here. I'm actually a physician by training. I'm a psychiatrist, and I'm also was the former CEO of TrendMD's on the marketing side. So I kind of know both ends. And I can say that from doctors' perspective, we certainly don't like getting our knocks on our door from pharma reps. So what's interesting is that what COVID has actually done is this has accelerated an underlying trend. And the underlying trend is shifting towards digital. So I think that's why HCP marketing has, in your words, weathered the storm. But I would say that it's gone one step further, which is just accelerating an underlying trend.
What pandemic-related changes specifically to HCP marketing have you had to deal with, or what were the challenges that you had to deal with your publishers earlier? And in fact, I've heard, some had the challenge of we had too much growth.
Well, I don't, this is echoing your first question, and I don't want to say that everything is all rosy, but the reality is that there haven't been many unique challenges, thankfully, for either TrendMD or, from my understanding, many people in the HCP marketing space, both on the advertiser side and on the publisher side. The one thing I would say is that when the pandemic first hit, so when we're talking about those early months, well, technically they weren't early, but early for the United States, it was March and April, there was a little bit of a shock. And I think what happened there was that pharma dollars were actually being shifted to later quarters because everyone wanted to see, what's happening. And I would say, if anything, the challenge there has been, well, now everything is backloaded. And we get that anyways on average years where most of the spend comes in Q4, but I would say even more. Now, the challenge with that is that the number of users, like the supply in the network, so to speak, like the actual audience, they don't follow those rules. So you have more dollars being shifted in a small amount of time. So it's potential that many campaigns will go unfilled, for example, like we won't be able to liquidate them, so to speak. We haven't run into that problem. I imagine there are going to be publishers, though, individual publishers, medical publishers, that are going to struggle because the dollars are being shifted so much.
What is, sort of the fundamental value proposition moving towards 2021, and whether it's changed or not, doesn't really matter. But what exactly is the value proposition, that TrendMD is putting out there?
Great question. So this is unrelated to COVID, but at our core, we're a native platform, so native advertising platform. Most, not all, but most HCP digital marketing today tends to be banners. There is, I would say, and the way that I often think about it is that pharma is often behind the consumer world by about a decade, so to speak. So native is the thing, obviously, in the consumer space. And I think that native is just starting to take off in the pharma space. And TrendMD is very uniquely positioned because we are not only the largest, but we're the largest network itself. So there are many offerings out there. So Medscape has, I'm sure, a native advertising offering, Doximity. But the challenge with these sites is that they're one site. It's one platform. The difference is with TrendMD, we have our product embedded on thousands of different websites. It's kind of like I guess the different value proposition between putting your ad dollars in Google, which is a disseminated platform essentially, versus putting it all into Facebook, which is a centralized. And there's room in the market for both. Each one's have different value propositions. The context matters. For us, TrendMD, we reach users, doctors specifically, directly in context when they're actually consuming other medical material, other peer-reviewed material. We recommend, clinical trials, for example, directly in context. So that can be very powerful as a way to, again, engage a physician audience because it's so contextually relevant to what they're currently doing.
And when you talk about your native platform and, the recommendations and growing your readership, what's going to work best in 2021?
So I think the growth of the company, particularly on the revenue side, is HCP marketing. So one of our biggest drivers of revenue is the ability to target doctors at an NPI number in the United States. So we can target individual physicians, which is quite powerful. From that, that's definitely our biggest growth driver. I would say a second growth driver, historically, we've been very focused on kind of the pharma marketing departments, like the marketing themselves. But over the last year and a half, we've kind of broadened a little bit, and we started dealing with folks from medical affairs, so the publications people at pharma companies. And there's actually a really natural fit there because, for medical affairs teams, historically they've been very focused on, okay, where do we get our paper published such that the most maximum number of targeted HCPs are going to see this and read it. That was kind of like medical affairs 1.0. My view is medical affairs 2.0 and 3.0. Well, there was open access, and now medical affairs has taken up on open access, and medical affairs 3.0 is hopefully using TrendMD as a means to disseminate clinical content to physicians. So those are the two growth areas I would say for 2021 and beyond.
And working with your partners, have they switched messaging? Have they, you talk about banners being still prolific and pharmaceutical industry still catching up to the ball game on advanced marketing techniques. Have the partners you've worked with, have you noticed a switch in exactly what their messages are or the frequency that they're changing messages or the depth? Is it a 2, 3, 4, 5-part message, or is it still same old?
I would say that there is a lot of variability in the market. So without naming any names, of course, but there's a lot of variability from pharma company to pharma company, from agency to agency. So some are going to be very driven by the data they get from campaigns, and they're going to be very nimble, and they're going to make changes based on that. For example, there are some agencies that literally request that we swap out our MPI list, so we target new doctors on their list, every week. Some even request less than on a weekly time frame. And then there are other pharma companies that are less driven by that and they plan on more of a quarterly basis. So I think there's variability. And I also think there's pros and cons to the strategy. So it doesn't directly answer your question, but I would say it's close. I would say there's a lot of variability in the market. One thing I do remember was that, again, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a little bit of caution from some pharma companies in promoting certain drugs. I don't even remember which ones, but I probably related to respiratory infections. But that was early on. There hasn't been a shift, especially now. I don't know if it's business as usual per se, because I think the spend has really increased. But I don't know if the messaging itself to physicians from pharma companies has changed, not at least that we've seen. Both the websites that they're offering and the headlines that they're running in the network you would know that it's COVID. I don't think there's going to change. And I'm not sure what the change would look like, even if there were a change.
You talked a little bit about, switching out the lists,
Mm-hmm.
and targeting new NPIs. That's a really popular topic right now amongst, medical media sales teams. They're being asked for uber targeted, lists and matching. Can you just expand upon that
Sure.
a little?
Yeah, so I have some opinions on that, actually, not affiliated with TrendMD, but actually as a doctor. And I'll say a couple things on this. So first of all, what we received from some pharma companies is like the request to swap out the list, let's use it as an example, on a weekly basis. So the idea is that, let's say you reach these 1,000 physicians, they click on your links and, you don't want to reach them again, so you swap out a new list. The challenge with that is that, what we don't know is how many times does a physician need to engage with messaging in order to actually be educated on the topic, right? So, if a physician goes once to a headline, that doesn't mean they're like an expert, and that doesn't mean it's done. So what I would say about the whole swapping out lists every week, it could end up being, although it seems really like intuitively it may seem, oh, this sounds great. Why do we want to hit the same position, multiple times in a month? It may not work that way. What we don't know is how many times you need to reach a physician, how many times you need to drive a physician to various pieces of content to educate them or to change their minds about their prescribing. I would say as a physician, there's no way that I'm going to alter my prescription, my prescribing patterns if I go click on one link. I'm never going to do that, right? So that's not really how physicians make decisions. So actually, when what I've been doing actually often is cautioning and saying, if you want to swap with the list, how are we measuring if these tactics are effective? How do you know that you're getting the physician to do what you want them to do?
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's kind of the Geico. I always go back to the Geico marketing. You can start a conversation with just about anybody, 15 minutes, and they can finish to save 15%, right? And they've used those like same 7 words for like 25 years, but you know it, right? And so, with a new therapy, do you need 5 interactions? Do you need 500 interactions?
And I often ask that question. So I ask, okay, so how many interactions do you think you really need to change a physician's prescribing habits? I would like to say as a physician, you need a lot, but I don't know. I mean, every physician is going to be different, but I'd like to say that, we're tough cookies to convince, so to speak, but I don't know. I think there's going to be variability, but I do think intuitively from a physician perspective, it's going to be more than one interaction. So I think sometimes and I think that one interaction mindset, I think it might work in the consumer world if you're buying, let's say, very cheap or simple products and convincing a consumer, hey, you probably need this like dish detergent. Click on the link, great, you made the purchase. It's not quite the same thing when you're prescribing drugs that can actually alter someone else's life. So
let's talk about data, KPIs, ROI. It's measurement is everything nowadays. Data is wonderful, but we all know that we have too much and we don't know what it means. Has there been any shifting of KPIs or ROI during this time or moving forward? Have you guys done anything?
So I would say that it's, as you did a perfect introduction about data. So there's a lot of it, but what the hell? How do you make sense of it? I think when it comes down to it, when you boil everything off, if you're talking about the marketing folks at pharma companies, their core KPI is really simple, in my opinion, based on what I've heard, is prescription lift, which is at the end of the day, you spend dollars. What do those dollars do to change prescription patterns? If there's no lift, then the marketing channel doesn't work. Now, if it were only that simple, the problem is that it's really, really hard to measure causation, to measure, okay, we did intervention A and then B happened, i.e. there's a prescription lift. So there's this persistent hunt for proxies that can predict, or leading indicators that can predict when a prescription lift is actually going to happen before it happens, right? Because prescription lift very much is like a lagging indicator, right? It happens after the fact. So I think this is just an ongoing challenge, and there's a lot of data out there. Is it the amount of time that physician has been engaged on the site? Is it the amount of clicks that have happened? Is it the page depth? So many questions I think remain unanswered with that. I think if anything, the shift in COVID in the last number of months is that there's probably just more data because there's more digital interactions now. So the difference is obviously is that when you're having, reps knock on physicians' doors, there's actually not very much, most of it's analog. You're not going to get very much data back from that, right? The difference is now you have all of this data, how these MPI numbers, how these physicians are engaging with your content. So if anything, there's been even more data, and the more data, the question is how do we make sense of it? What works, what doesn't, what is a proxy, what is not? So I don't think there's been a shift in terms of making sense of it. But my disclaimer, my caveat is that I don't work for a pharma company. Maybe they know something I don't. so
Yep.
that's a good question actually
Yeah.
for someone that works at one of these big pharma.
Anything around new media, video, audio, podcasts, social media, anything?
Yeah, good question. Good question. So our network, ultimately what the advertisers or pharma companies are providing to us is a URL, a hyperlink, right? And all we're doing is we're directing traffic to a page based on a headline. That's what native is in its purest form. And the destination sites, I've seen a mix of all sorts of things. So meaning when I say destination site, that's the site that the pharma company wants us to direct traffic to. We've seen videos, we've seen content, we've seen white papers, we've seen actual peer-reviewed papers, a mix. I like to say that clinical content tends to resonate the best with physicians, not necessarily the peer-reviewed long-form paper, although some physicians do prefer that. What I find is, summary of the paper really helps, and then backed up with the actual paper if they're really interested in it. That tends to seem, and you know what, that's never changed. I think that physicians have always been like that. For the internet, sales reps used to knock on physicians' doors and hand them a pamphlet that was called detailing, which included a reprint of the peer-reviewed paper as well as kind of a summary. That's what it used to be like. So I think we're trying to make that happen in the digital world as much as possible, because that's what physicians want also. There are actually, so in the ecosystem, I don't think the advertisers are struggling. I do think that some publishers are struggling. I think certain scholarly publishers are struggling, but that's not news. That's not new necessarily. They've been struggling actually for quite some time. And when I say scholarly publishers, I mean, the purveyors of peer-reviewed content. Some of them are struggling, some of them are not. But on our end, right now it's been pretty smooth. This is actually going to be this will be our biggest year ever in the company, and we're about almost 6 years old as a company. And our growth rate, we're going to grow. We're probably going to nearly double our revenue this year. So in answer to your question, what's not working? Well, a lot of things, knock on wood, a lot of things are working right now. So it's pretty good. We're not complaining.
As a follow-up, how are you going to define success in 2021 and beyond?
So there's two parts to that. So obviously we always have to keep the lights on, right? So revenue is an important driver. Revenue has to keep growing because money allows us to do everything we want to do. Question is, what do we want to do? What are we actually here for? At the end of the day, what TrendMD, our mission and we've always been this since the day zero when we started the company, is helping to serve content to physicians. Hopefully we'll continue on that journey by serving them content that they didn't know existed that might help them make a better decision with a patient. Or on the research side, it may give them ideas to spawn other research ideas. It could be that serendipity moment. We're like, oh, I didn't know this paper existed. It drives serendipity and it creates more research. That's what we're here to do. So I don't think anything has changed certainly nothing has changed since we started, and that kind of is the goal going forward. I led with revenue because obviously we can't really do anything else if we're not making any money, we're not keeping lights on. So, but yeah, that would be kind of a simple answer to your question.
Is there a lasting trend that you're going to see come out of 2020 that in 5 or 10 years people are going to look back on as that was a landmark moment?
Yeah. So this is actually a nice question that actually goes back to your original, which is that I think the lasting trend is digital is here. I think that when pharma started shifting their dollars to digital, it was slow. It was far slower than what happened in the consumer world. It was the slope of the line was almost flat. And I think that, definitely this year there's been an acceleration of the curve, and I think that will just continue. I think that there probably will be a place for sales reps, but that place will be much smaller. So right now, when you look at pharma marketing budgets, still, the reps are getting more than digital. I think that's going to inverse over the next decade as we get more and more granular in our targeting capabilities and where we can reach physicians. I think more and more dollars are going to flow into digital channels. Again, all we have to do is look at the consumer world and kind of use that as almost as a crystal ball for what's happening in the pharma marketing world.
There's a lot of discussion on whether social media should be part of the pharmaceutical, quiver,
Yeah.
I'm guessing social media is a competitor for you. So what
It is and it isn't. So, it depends on the way you look and the way you're defining social media. In the most rigid definition, are we talking about healthcare specific social media? So that would be like Doximity. I don't have any issues with that. And, Doximity is a validated platform. We know who we're reaching. I think on other platforms like Facebook or Twitter, I think even if Facebook's allowing it or pharma companies want to do it, I don't think the physicians want to be bombarded with ads when they're on Facebook or Twitter. So I think this comes back down to context, right? So I think Doximity makes sense. You're clearly on a doctor platform communicating with other doctors. TrendMD makes sense because you're reading other scholarly material. Why not see advertisements for other content? Context is king. I really believe that. And I don't know, even if Facebook is allowing it, even if everything goes well, I think at the end of the day, I would be skeptical that physicians actually want to be seeing pharma ads on that platform.
Yeah, I hear you. And I used to work in digital marketing, and we toyed around with it, and sometimes we'd see success and sometimes we'd be like, what is that?
I also think, one thing I will add to that is that we've been using throughout this conversation kind of HCPs kind of blanketly, right? Like, and the reality is that there are massive cultural differences between one specialty to the next. And when I say cultural differences, one specialty likes to read certain types of content, the other specialty does totally different things. So it's actually it's really difficult to blanket. So going back to your question about social media, maybe family doctors really want to actually be reached on Facebook, whereas cardiologists are saying, absolutely not, leave me alone, I don't want to see you there. So there are going to be differences between specialties and even within specialties, like subspecialty groups. So this goes back to the targeting, understanding your audience, and how to reach your audience based on the channels they engage with.
Yeah, and that's the same. That's the same with print and digital. Some specialties still want print, right? And some want give it to me digital. We always used to say ER docs are 180 degrees different from ENTs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just a final summary. Again, looking forward to 2021. Final summary.
Ultimately, when we're looking to 2021, a lot of people thinking that there's going to be a vaccine soon, and we're going to see a return to normalcy. I actually don't think that's going to happen. I think that even if there is a vaccine that does come out, we're still going to see a lot of the precautions because it's going to take time for the population to get vaccinated, et cetera, et cetera. Bottom line is that for HCP marketers, I think you're going to see the same trend as what's been going on in 2020, meaning more and more doctors want to be reached online, and that's the only place to reach them. Even when we do have a vaccine and things start to normalize, I don't think it's going to go back to quote normal. I think that the reality is that physicians are going to get used to being reached digitally. They're going to form that preference. So I think that, but I do think in 2021 and beyond is that we're going to continue to see increased shift of spend into digital and an increased shift of what physicians want and where they want to be reached.